Hi, good evening. My name's John Barker. I've come to read a couple of prison stories. The way I'd like to do is I'm going to read one story first, and then if you want to ask anything about prison, politics in the past or any of that, we do that, and then I'd like to read another story at the end. So I hope that goes okay. My old comrade Stuart Christie thinks it should be recorded, so we have a man here who's kindly going to film it, so you may appear on some film that will appear on one of Stuart Christie's many websites. Anyway, this set of stories, I mean, I have to be straight with you, it's very old. I wrote them about 30 years ago, in my last year in prison, the year I came out. But it was only about 2 or 3 years ago that they finally got published. And I did think, well, you know, I don't want to be part of some nostalgia business, but I thought that there is something, I hope that there is something in the stories about how great it is when resistance gets its own rewards. And I think that is there in the stories, and I think that is, not to say timeless, because we don't live in a timeless world, but I think that made it worth it printing them again, or printing them after so many years. The first story I'm going to read takes place, I'm doing a 10-year sentence. I'm about halfway through, and it's called ghost trained, or we used to call it shanghaied, from one prison where I'd been for a couple of years to a max security prison called Long Lartin, which was like the new model kind of max security prison stuck in the middle of nowhere in Worcestershire. So I'm quite new in this place by now. But the two spur I got on came to be sound. Phil, a tasty guy from Birmingham who ran the book on the wing, was already there when I arrived. Likewise, the Harrier. They had him down as antisocial, having as little to do with screws as possible. He'd resolved never to enter the TV room, had a severe haircut, and motivated me into fitness running with sometimes sarcasm, enthusiasm now and then. There was also the Sailor, a big, gentle scouser who was in patches for a while as well as being on the A book. Patches were yellow stripes down your trousers and black and white targets sewn on the back of your jacket. It meant he had escaped, been caught at it, or been accused of trying. In fact, he'd been on the run for a few years and was a fine ballad singer and hooch maker. Most of all, Irish Republican prisoners slowly filtered through from the allocation prisons. Onto F-Wing came Joe, another great friend, a souped-up, streetwise 20-year-old from Irish Birmingham. He looked lost the first couple of days, then opened up, an expert at setting off alarm bells which were situated all over the jail and were there for screws in trouble. He would set them off, and the heavy mob would rush round the corridors and look dead stupid when they arrived at an empty space. If there was time, we'd find a discreet vantage point and look out to see which screws looked ready to spew up from the exercise. Sometimes there'd be a rash of bell ringing, and the governor would put up notices on the lines of a small minority spoiling it for the majority. He did love a notice, that man. You'd have thought the jail was a fucking outward bound course. Joe's arrival and the coming of summer cheered me up no end. We started to get regular 2 evenings a week exercise on the field. The sun is warm and light through the cell window. It comes through the spaces between bars and lays stripes of light on me, lying on a bright striped blanket. It throws up shadows on wall and ceiling, the shadows of bars ballooned off at offbeat angles. I'm thinking about this pavement, I know. A good one with big slabs that warm up in the sun, slanting unevenly down to a basement. Maybe not thinking about it, more a case of it arriving just at a bad moment when even life outside had seemed just a formality and not the big glowing lamp at the end of it all. The door clicks. The green light comes on in the cell wall panel. It means that the computer has unlocked all the cell doors. I don't move, just take in the sounds. What's out of place at this moment is the loud click-clack of a screw's footsteps. He's stopped at my door. He opens it and gives me a letter and a faintly token indication that he is pleased I am receiving a letter. The letter's out the ordinary twice over. It's unusual to get any kind of a letter at 6 in the evening, and this has got no stamp on the envelope. Oh, nice one. It's from another friend in Holland. I read the first 2 paragraphs and stop. I hate rushing a letter. It's something to take in slowly and stretch out in like a bath. Besides, it's the unwanted adrenaline that goes with an unexpected letter. Got to calm down, make the most of it. And we're due out on exercise any minute. But I do know why the envelope has no stamp. It's come in a parcel. She's written at the start of the letter about sending me some things. I'll have to apply for them. Downstairs for outside association. Downstairs for outside association. They really love that tannoy in Long Lartin, and especially on cold mornings when I'm deep in my pit. And what the hell is there to get up for? One joker of an SO, a well-spoken oddity on the receiving end of Joe's special attention, he used to make the call for breakfast sound all too wholesome, like we were whistling cornflake kids. In his early days, it was inmates for breakfast. Fucking inmates. Then, when punter enthusiasm was not what it should be, it was, this is definitely the last call for breakfast. As it is now, there's just a bland, last call for association. This gets me up and I'm off down the corridor and out into the hot, still air. I'm due for a big run round the field tonight. The Harrier sure has got me at it. I salute my Irish mates standing round the wing wall. They've made their handball court and decide I'll walk a lap or two before the run. Loosen up. I fall in with a witty Republican, also in patches. We've got no distance at all when I hear my name being called. Your man in patches points at arms waving through a window in the next bordering wing. The screw behind the arms calls my name again and I go down the slope to the window. Barker, there's these things in a parcel for you. You'll know about them. Yeah, sure, from Holland. That's right. If you sign for them here, you can pick them up from your own wing. I put my hand in, and as I'm signing the form, ask casually what it is. The guard and his pal have smirks on their faces, but they're embarrassed with it. Well, Barker, there's some puzzles where you have to put a ball in a hole, a toy that goes moo when you press it, and a toy mouse, he says. All this punctuated with laughs. The laughs are condescending and unnerved. Yeah, right, of course, I say. Back up the slope, I tell your man the situation. He laughs, I analyse. Of course, she is into crazy stunts. Maybe there's something inside it. No, wouldn't stand a chance. When a toy mouse came down on the security desk, you can be sure they gave it a real prodding. Your man's no help. He's still laughing. Or maybe, I say, she thinks this is an asylum. I've had my own doubts, believe me. And in Holland, you know what it's like, super liberalism, you know, the nasty sort where prisons and asylums are all the same thing, therapy all round. Your man is not impressed with my reasoning. He does not aim to reassure. Normally speaking, he says, if I got a toy mouse off a woman, I'd take it as a brush off. An offbeat Dear John, if you see what I mean. I do see what you mean, but it's not that kind of situation. We're not close like that. Anyway, why pick on the Johns? Why not a Dear Jerry? We're coming back round to the handball wall, and I'm going to have to get this run started. Maybe I'm taking it too seriously, this running business, feeling tense like I am. Oh, fuck it. I take my pumps off and put on the red headband I've made for myself in the workshop. The mouse goes out of my mind as I start to run, feeling the grass under my feet and between my toes. The grass isn't parched yet, no Brillo pad feel, but the blades have begun to stiffen and they scrape and scrub luxuriously. The pace is still easy and I can feel my lungs doing their work till the rhythm's there, legs and lungs pumping together. Nothing can go wrong. Turning the corner again, my face upwards, the sun's head on. The light sparkles through the sweat trickling in my eyes. For a while, I could be anywhere. Then finish with a 300-yard sprint and collapse on the ground between the handball wall and the public park-type toilet, all ready to spew up. Your man spots me in this state and is over like a shot, ruthless bastard. Must be one of those clockwork mechanical ones, that mouse. They're going to have you down as a lunatic. Give it a few weeks and it'll be, put me down for the welfare gov. Someone's nicked me mouse, he says in outrageous Cockney. Yeah. It's all I can manage. I'm gasping. No, not the welfare, it'll be the psycho. Largactyl and sympathy. Officers, you'll say, the mouse and these games are essential to this man's sanity and rehabilitation. Look, I can take one or two lines, I say, pressing on with the analytical tone. Either I can make it whimsical, like how's about you take me off the A book, what self-respecting Irish prisoner do you know with a toy mouse? Or I can just go in bold and front it out. Give me my mouse, cunt. The laundryman, another Irish wind-up merchant, can't wait to get in his 5p's worth. Why not go in all dopey and daft and give it the old, have you seen me mouse, mister? Do it for the crack. Laundryman, I say gravely, when they take you out for the firing squad and ask if you've any last words, you'll say, but I only did it for the crack. And they're going to say, oh yeah, crack, crack, and you're dead, brown bread, full of holes. The screws start moving in from the perimeter fence. The dog handlers look like they're Alsatians, like they're ready to growl. Some cons move in ahead of time and get the bird, like they're sheep or what? In the corridor, finally, the laundryman warms to his task. Give him the full lash, have a tear rolling out the corner of your eye. Go on, give me me mouse, governor. OK, sounds like a good stunt, sounds like it. But I haven't got the front to pull it off. Besides, supposing it backfires and they try to nut me off, that's pure paranoia. I've every right to be paranoid, I say. Back on the wing, it's very quiet. I go straight to the wing office. Present is the slippery SO and two sidekicks. I've decided on my course. Front it out. Only the atmosphere in the office is subdued. It does not suggest wisecracks at my expense. I believe you've a toy mouse of mine in here. Slippery SO doesn't look up. He's well into a snowed under all his damn paperwork routine. There's some things up on the cabinet for you, he says. And I can see he looks genuinely distracted. I grin wolfishly, at least that's how it feels, and pick up the parcel. I'm out quick and up on the landing. It's quiet there too. Joe comes into my cell. So how was it in the office? Nothing really. Nothing happened. No wisecracks. See, all that paranoia, all that planning, making a big deal over nothing, that's your problem. A mountain out of a mouse hole, I say. Having taken a lot of stick in the last hour, I laugh loud at my own joke and say it again. A mountain out of a mouse hole. Joe winces, eyes the mouse and rams it under my nose. I can see a crazy blank look come over his eyes. I know this look. I'm wary. This is no mouse, he says. This is a rat, a long-tailed rat. Bollocks, it's too small. Look at its tail, for fuck's sake. Anyway, I need to borrow it for a while. Hang about, I say, I want a good look at it first. He bends it a couple of times. Firm but flexible, just what the governor would call himself. Joe dusts its whiskers and flicks its tail. He is looking dangerously vacant. I examine the rest of the parcel. There's a pink cylinder with holes in the top and a picture of some lobotomised cow stuck around it. I press it. Moo, it goes. Moo! We laugh like crazy guys. The security screws must have had a whale of a time with it. Phil comes in with an ear-to-ear grin. You heard the story then, the night's events. I'm not with you, I say, as Joe makes those cows moo and I stroke the mouse in my hand. Phil looks at it closely and the grin stretches some more. That's some rat, he says. I could have done with that in my showdown with the human variety. It's not a rat, I say, it's too small. Never mind the size, look at its tail. They are stubborn, these guys. I'm getting nowhere, so I changed tack. So what did go off tonight? They were distracted in the office just now. There was something else on their minds. You really haven't heard? Heard what? We just come off exercise. Wait till you've heard this. This will put the dairy on your rat. He can see me frowning. Rat, mouse, what's the odds? Because tonight saw a dramatic finale to the double agent's career. You remember last week I told you he's got the message that he knew that we knew he was a grass? We could hardly have missed it. For a week, Phil had been putting up regular cartoons showing the grass in action. They were a welcome change from all those messages from the governor, and taken all together amounted to a Kama Sutra of grassing. Tonight, it finally got to him, Phil said. He sits down in the chair, me and Joe take seats on the bed, and he gives us the full story. It seems the cartoons had taken their toll. The grass has been nipping out every morning to rip them down off the notice board. He knows Phil's behind it, so he's given him a pull in the weaver's shop where they're both working. Phil's come straight out with it and tells him he's a known double agent. He's been seen with a screw straight after some business has gone off in the workshop. The screws can't have seen anything that went off, but when the heavy mob arrive, they know exactly who to go for. The grass really blows it then by saying he never talked to any screw, which really got up Phil's nose, him denying it, because he's seen it with his own eyes. So that's it. It's on the line. Obviously, grasses are a menace. When you're doing a number that makes life a bit more human and fucks up the smooth running of repression at the same time, their existence means you've got to have eyes in the back of your head. We're not born that way, so it's a strain. And it was getting worse. The parole system, which is early release at their discretion, had put grassing in full swing. What made these people even more dangerous is that they get to the point where they don't know what's real anymore. They're sticking up names while convincing themselves one way or another that it's not really grassing. It gets worse still when they start coming up with names for things they know fuck all about. They've got so used to being centre stage with some screw or the governor that they don't like to let him down. We're all guilty of a bit of gossip and the seduction of being in the know, but the real difference between Phil and the grass is that Phil is a serious bloke. He does things that need a good head and plenty of arsehole, so he doesn't talk about it much, let alone grass. Anyway, after their eye-to-eye in the workshop, Phil started to hear wide-eyed accounts of how this guy is a karate expert. Only the grass has had to strong it. How he's been attacked by 7 heavies, not a decent 1 or 2, but 7, and how he's laid them all out, spark out. But then everyone who says they're into karate, they're always a black belt at the least. Like ex-army screws letting out little rumours about themselves. It's always the SAS or the paras, never the kitchen or the fucking stores. Turns out that while we've been out on exercise, Phil had been doing some cooking with Doug, a working pal from Birmingham, and while they were eating, the grass has come into Phil's cell and given him the same spiel. 7 geezers he's knocked out in a street in Brum. This scene doesn't happen anywhere, but Brum's their hometown, and they know for sure it hasn't happened there. And then, with a big pause stuck in the middle, he said, I only give a man 1 warning. After that, he's dead. The stuff Oscars are made of, Phil said. Him and Doug, they're sat there like those characters you read about, rubbing their eyes with disbelief. It's not Doug's business, but he thinks it could be the funniest thing since the screw that had his tea spiked with acid ripped off his uniform shirt and jacket to reveal a Mickey Mouse T-shirt and shouted to the PO to go and fuck himself and his keys. Next thing is the sailors come from the TV room to tell him that the grass is in there with his partner in villainy. Minutes later, he's shot out the TV room, giving it with the arms chopping movement. He's turned to the 2 duty screws out there, turned on his heels, thrown a stiff arm in their direction and told them the score. Don't make a move or you're dead. The sailors saw it all. The screws just sat there, mouths opening and closing like they was in a fish tank. Which is more or less what Joe and I are doing, sat on the bed among the brown paper of my parcel. And what happens is the grass arrives at Phil's cell, giving it all the karate sounds, the karate moves. Phil's not a heavy, not in the jail, but he's giving him a dig and there's some wrestling on the floor, by which time the TV room screws have pulled themselves together, rung the bell, because the heavy moths arrived at the scene breathless, cons blocking the skir long enough for it to be all over by the time they're there. So what happened to the man himself, I want to know? Fuck knows. Back in his cell, I guess. No one's nicked, but the guards have got to know what happened. That explains it. No wonder they were subdued in the office. One of their top agents neutralised in action. Wish I'd been there to see the TV room screws. Oh yeah, no question, the guards were the leading comics. While me and Phil are relishing the details, Joe's split with the mouse. It's not long and we hear a scream from the landing, then another, then a loud scraping and banging. We're just on our way out to see what's happening when Joe comes back in with a big grin, mouse in the hand, hanging by its tail. Phil's arms are out in a mute question. Your man Jack, Joe says. I waved it under his nose, and you know gypsies can't stand rats, can't abide them, so he screamed and started whinging. You shouldn't have done that, me son, it's not right. So I give him another flash, and this time he's roared and run off into his cell. He's barricaded up with his bell. Outrageous. This is fucking outrageous. Even if it is a rat, which I don't accept for a moment, it's not supposed to be an offensive weapon. Someone's going to get the needle, it won't last the course. Even as I'm speaking, I know it's a waste of time. I'm locked up with dangerous nutters. Phil darts out quickly and is quickly back. All true, he says. Jack's looking out the spile, pale as fuck and moaning to the sailor. So, of course, it's not long before I'm honoured by a visit from the sailor himself. That's a dangerous weapon you got there, he says. I think you should put it in my safe hands. A rhetorical question, seeing as he's already out the door with it. As a man, we squeeze into my doorway for a good view. The sailor's standing at Jack's door. Let me in, he says. I've just checked it out. It's only a toy thing, nothing to worry about. I've given young Joe a pull, told him straight. You know, he's a fucking tearaway. I'm not feeling too good, is all we can hear from Jack's cell. The sailor carries on, his tone reassuring. There's no point in banging yourself up like this. It might help to talk things over. There's a scraping sound. Jack's door opens just a little. The sailor eases himself in. We can just hear their voices. The sailor's offering to make a cup of tea. Thanks, lad. He just doesn't think that, Joe. He's only a kid, the sailor says. That's how they are. You're right, they just don't think. We creep out to get a good view. Jack's turning around to get his snout and matches off the bed. There's a terrible scream. The sailor's managed to slip it on his pillow. He runs out screaming, doesn't even see us. Phil nips in to recover the mouse with who knows what villainy in mind, while the sailor's away to tell his pals what a coup he's had. Phil, I say, please be careful. I'm sounding pathetic myself. Events are out of my control. Look, someone's going to get so wound up, they'll end up stomping on it. Don't worry about a thing. But I am worried. I just want to try it on Houdini. OK, I feel better. Houdini, he's a bit of a div, not likely to stomp on anything, and fuck know how he's got the name, because Houdini wasn't a div except for all that death-defying stuff. I can see Phil from the doorway. He's gone up the corridor and placed the mouse on a gloomy bit of landing close to the man's cell. Moments later, he's got Houdini out there and points in the direction of the mouse. My mouse. It's a dumb show. We can't hear anything, but we can read the body language. Houdini's got a dumb grin on his face, and Phil must be persuasive, because they've gone into the man's cell and come out with Houdini holding a brown paper bag. He looks at the mouse in the shadow and gets down on his hands and knees. Now he's waving the bag back and forth in its direction. Phil's standing in the man's doorway giving us some kind of tic-tac, and the dumb show's starting to make sense. He's persuaded Houdini to catch it in the bag. Yeah, and I'll lay money he's got a bit of cheese in his other hand because it's just one of those evenings. Joe and I creep down the passage for a better view. He has got a bit of cheese. Moves his arm slowly. What's the matter with him? Can't he see the fucking thing's not moving? Whatever Houdini's done on the out to wind up on here, whatever it was, he shouldn't have done it. Never stood a chance. He brings down the bag, folds the whole thing in his hand, looks closer, and is nearly angry. Poor sod. He shrugs. End of association, end of association. I pick up the mouse and take it back to my cell, then get a jug of water for bang up. For the last minutes, the landing is buzzing, cons moving about and exchanging magazines, milk, tea, sugar. I'm in behind the cell door. It clicks as the computer locks us all in. I hear the screw's footsteps stopping and starting, looking in each spy hole. Now it's mine. The footsteps move off. I give the mouse a searching look. It's been well made. From the back, no question, it's very realistic. A sculpture comes to mind. I get a bit of stale bread from the table and smear it with marmalade, put it on the windowsill under the bottom of the cell bars, and stick its head and whiskers in the marmalade so I can see it from the back. It looks like it's just climbed on the bread. Brilliant. Much better it is a toy one. No noise, no mess, no feeding, no leaving it with someone like the budgie freaks do when they're dragged off down the block. The next day on the way to work, I hear the grass has made a less than half-hearted attempt to top himself. He's even left a note that says he doesn't bear any hard feelings against Phil, the name written. Grassing from the grave, that would have been a new one. As it is, he'll have booked himself into a cushy jail. Later, I had to sign the property sheet again. There were 3 entries at the bottom, 1 rubber rat. Thanks. You don't have to. Oh, you can clap at the end. We can't get embarrassed. We have to. You can clap at the end. I don't know if anybody wants to ask anything about prisons, the past, the present. I was hoping for a break because I've got one more story to read. So.
What were your actual charges?
Conspiracy to cause explosions and possession of explosives. And
was that when they raided the flat?
Yeah. Yeah.
But you weren't present there at the time, were you?
I was present at the time, but no, all the stuff wasn't there.
If you were to look at, obviously, what happened at the trial and all that thing, and now, what would you say, what's the best position for the two?
Then or now?
Yeah, are you getting worse or better?
Very hard to say. Prisons are worse, that's for sure. This was, I say in the introduction that in a way I was in a kind of golden age of maximum security prisons. They've got a lot worse. Well, I don't know if any of you have heard Mark Barnsley or you know Mark Barnsley. Well, they've got a lot worse now. It's real, carrot and stick, really hard. Yeah, you know.
Yeah.
So from that, prisons have got worse. In a way, it's much tougher now, isn't it? Yeah. It's much tougher now. In a way, we had it. It was easy. It was easy to get a kind of, a job that would keep you going. Rents were very cheap, and the level of surveillance, repression stuff now. Is on a completely different scale.
Yeah.
So from that point of view, from the other point of view, it's, you know, it's just fantastic that there are working social centres all over the place. And for me, you know, I'm not being sectarian, but it's really good. Like in the Vistion strike, which I went on some pickets. It was really good people. There was no people recruiting you to Trotskyist groups. There was no paper selling. So from that point, you know, from the point of view of kind of solidarity and there being a real base of people like yourselves, I think that that's actually better than that time. But it's much tougher now. And prisons, you know, prisons are a kind of distorted reflection. I mean, they're obviously a distorted reflection of the outside world, but they do reflect what's going on in the outside world in that way. And as again I say in the introduction to the book, you know, I was also kind of lucky, as I said, this golden age. Number one is that there had been a Parkhurst riot in 1968, in which a large number of screws were absolutely terrified. I mean, really terrified. Now that makes, you know, that becomes in the collective screw head. Now that was beginning to wear off, you know, when I was in jail. But then the big difference was, you know, whether you agree with them politically or not, was the Irish Republican prisoners who were incredibly solid, took no shit at all. I was involved in a few solidarity actions with them, and they made a big difference. So there's always a balance of forces, isn't there? And the balance of forces was favourable to us at that time.
Did you have like a plan of how you were going to get through easier in prison before you went in? Did you just
A plan?
did you have any like, right, I don't keep my head down, or?
That's a very interesting question. No, I didn't have a plan. I mean, not in a sense of, you know, it's a new situation for me. I had somewhere I hadn't expected to be. A plan. I mean, in a sense, I read a lot. Obviously, you know, I read a lot of political, economic stuff. I mean, as you are in this, you know, prisons are very funny. There you are. You're in a very small space with a lot of people for sort of 11 hours a day, and then for 13 hours a day, you're completely on your own. So obviously, you do a lot of reading and so on. And there were struggles within the prison itself, which will hopefully come out in the second story I'm going to read. And obviously, you want to get through to the end without, you know, eating as little shit as possible. I mean, that's the only way you can talk about planning. You know, is to, you know, basically take as little shit off them as possible. Find ways of, making collectively, and that was what was amazing about this time in jail, collectively actually making things easier for ourselves in little ways. You know, it's a constant, as I say, I talk about a balance of forces between cons and screws, and it was like that. I mean, they've now, from what Mark Barnsley tells me, they've tipped the balance much more to the screws, and divide, and certainly, I mean, divide and rule, and in a really systematic way. Yeah.
Did you feel like you managed to keep up good contacts with people involved politically outside while you were inside? I mean, did you feel well supported, or that kind of thing?
Yeah, I was very lucky. I mean, the Stoke Newington Support Committee was fantastic. Politically, actually, probably much smarter than I was, which I think is often the case with defence committees. And yeah, no, I did. I kept, I was writing, I was writing all these letters. At that time, things have changed a lot. Perhaps one of the things that's changed for the good, we only had these tiny, letter things, sort of 4 tiny folded pages with lines, and my writing was getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And I was, people were, it was possible to get, we all fought to stop them censoring any political literature. So yeah, I did keep up with things, and it was this is a long time ago. I mean, incredibly excited by the Portuguese Revolution in '75. Felt really, while thinking, well, this is probably going to get screwed in the end, but it was a very strong feeling. And then being, both from people who visited me and, reading things, feeling that around the time I got released, that it was a period of defeat, which I think it was. I think around 1976, 77, there was definitely a mood of defeat in this country, and probably most of Europe. And that was a funny thing, of course, you're so keen to get out, and you're obviously feeling really good about getting out, but I kind of knew I was coming out into a different world, because visitors were keeping me clued up on a lot of things. And I kind of felt, I'm also inevitably, I kind of think, there were a lot of things I wish I'd been around for. I mean, there were a lot of good fights going on in the 70s that I wasn't around, and I kind of missed that.
Was there any blatant setup?
Could we not go into this? Do you mind?
Okay.
I think I've written, they fitted up a guilty man. I mean, that's all I don't really want to say any more than that.
Obviously, the trial was quite famous at the time. When you first went inside, did you get a reaction off the regular prisoners? They must have known from the trial vaguely who you were.
Yeah, it's a funny. One of the things. People did know, and I mean because one of the things that I was accused of was blowing up the main Metropolitan Police computer. Obviously, people were reasonably well disposed to it. They might have thought we were weird, a bit weird, but what was really important is that at that time, prison is it's a class thing. I mean, prisons are full of working class people, and I was very lucky that most of the certainly in my time in Wormwood Scrubs, I mean there was a whole group of us, young working class guys who were very radical, and I mean they were armed robbers and so on, but they were very radical in what they thought musically. We smoked a lot of dope together. I mean, it was it wasn't like completely. It wasn't like that I was, like a complete weirdo. That's what I'm saying. And that, maybe it would be different now. I don't know. But there was, this was, and it's again another reason that I thought it was worth publishing the books, even so many years afterwards, because, the way the 60s and the early 70s are presented, they've really been. This was a period of when the young working class men they took everything. They were optimistic, confident, and that's why the repression started. The ruling class hated it. And fortunately, I was in with people who were, as I said, young working class guys who were absolutely confident and optimistic and radical. So. And whether, I think a lot of people did follow the trial. Yeah, they said, shame he didn't get off. Jury was good, and so, which they were. As I explained to the young man who I spoke to when I arrived here, I mean, I'm a great believer in the jury system since they saved me 5 years. And, if New Labour they've been pushing hard to try and curtail it, and when they get rid of the jury system, that's the time to fuck off, I'm telling you. Because they're the only defence we've got, I think.
does this fact still stand today as the longest trial in English history?
I think it's been I think I think there's been a longer one since. Yeah. I mean, I think one of those. Sorry. Yes, the Mac Libel trial probably was, and then I think there was a fraud trial that went on for 18 months. Yes, the Mac Libel one was. Sorry. Yeah. The only thing that I would say about the trial is, I hope none of you are ever on a political trial, but I think it's important that there is always at least one person defending themselves, so that you're not just so that you build up some relationship with the jury, rather than just being, a bit of a cipher who's being represented by a, professional mouthpiece. Anyway, I hope none of you are ever in this situation. Who knows these days?
So you're happy to be an advocate for representing yourself?
Yes. In my trial, there were 3 of us defended ourselves, and 5 people had lawyer. I mean, you need a bit of lawyer nous as well. I mean, people who do, know that. But I think you do need some. If it's a collective trial, I think you do need at least one. In Persons Unknown, they followed the same, which was just about the time I got released. There was a trial called Persons Unknown, and they did the same tactic. They had 1 or 2 people defending themselves and got a good result. You'd think with the banking crisis and how that's been solved in the interest of capital, you'd think, this was a time, and maybe it will be a time, and maybe we have a job to do, because the people are, over the next year, I think a lot of people are going to get very, very angry, and it can go, it can go several ways, can't it? It can go the BNP way, or it can go our way, and that's really down to doing our best, I think. And trying to do our best to direct the anger where it should be directed, and not where, the high and mighty would like it to be directed. I mean, certainly the other. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I live in London, so the most. I think the most important struggles of, which again have been predominantly by libertarians, well organised, have been around, attacks on so-called illegal immigrant workers. And I don't know if you followed the case at SOAS, School of Oriental and African Studies, where the police raided the cleaners, who a lot of whom were immigrants, and the response from both students and outside libertarian groups was really, really good and fast. So I don't know if that answers the question a little bit.
So they raided the cleaners, did you say?
Yeah, actually raided the university.
With the assistance of the university staff.
Yeah. And then there was, some of the, I think quite a large number of academics were really shocked, and obviously were put on the line by students. And
So like the FCT check sort of thing.
yeah. I think that this. I know that anarchist comrades in Greece, that this has become a main focus of their politics at the moment, is defending of immigrant rights in Greece. So, do you fancy another story? Can you cope with another story? This story is a bit different, because it is, it's a bit more, I suppose you could say it's a bit more overtly political. It's about there's a little bit about organising and it's called Manoeuvres in a Long-Term Wing. It was eerie and somehow insulting to be sat in the TV room of Long Lartin watching cons on the rooftop of Hull Prison. The revolution will not be televised, feeling that's how it ought to be. The midday news featured at least one friend behind a mask. The fact that I was able to watch it all seemed to say something about the insufferable self-confidence of the prison system. But then as far as the riot went, the main concern of the Home Office was to be seen to be in control, not panicking. Maybe to have disarmed the TVs of other max security jails would have been a sign of weakness, and as likely as not set them off too. The cons looked great with their balaclavas, blankets and banners high up on the roofs. Prison officers had evacuated the cell blocks but maintained coordinated control, the TV said. That meant they'd shit themselves and done a runner. I thought of how bad things must have been there. What with remission and parole, cons are not in a hurry to riot. I hoped Jake was enjoying the elation, but feared for him come the end of the cons' control of the wing blocks. I waited for the first predictable stories of ringleaders. By this time, me and the sailor had managed to get on a VTC welding course. That afternoon in the shop, I thought of possible solidarity actions, but after talking with a few guys at tea break, it all seemed aggravatingly unrealistic. All I managed was graffiti around the place with a magic marker I got my hands on. Many weeks later, a few Hull cons started to turn up in LL. Hull was out of action. The screws who'd done a runner when it went off were cocky and brutal when they'd regained control. One guy who'd been in a wing that hadn't joined the riot told me how they'd ripped up his photos and liquidated his budgie. I was sympathetic, but he did go on about that budgie. I wanted to know everything. He just wanted more and more letters written, Parliament, Ombudsman, High Courts, this and that. You don't give a monkeys about his budgie, Joe said. You're like a Trotskyist. You listen to his story, but only because you're itching to recruit him. Joe and I knew each other well by then. He certainly knew how to wind me up. I tried to strangle him and we fell in a heap on the floor of my cell. Recruit him to what, you cheeky fucker, I shouted. He just went on laughing. I'm sorry for the geezer. I'm sorry about his budgie. It's just he does go on about it. Yeah, well, you must be a masochist listening then. He wasn't even in the riot and he's come out of it all right. Easy for you to say, I say. You're not minus a budgie. We got more substantial news when cons like Attila the Scouse turned up much later. He'd done 3 months in a special chokey within the Dartmoor chokey. The Home Office had recreated the conditions of the special units, which they'd been forced to close down after a lot of protest and the sheer willpower of Mickey Williams. This time they'd been crafty. They'd opened no new buildings, given it no name, just imposed a regime of solitary made absolute, a planned routine of sensory deprivation. By this time I'd experienced some minimal sensory deprivation myself, and that was bad enough. The cube cells of LL, the non-availability of pirated paint like we used to have in the scrubs to break up the universal white speckle, night after night of it could do funny things to a person. About a year before, I'd got this real scare one night, one of those moments between being awake and being asleep, a blinding rush, started up from my feet, sped up my body and boom in the head. A heart attack, a cerebral knockout, that was it, curtains. I survived, shaken, and next day Dave told me what had happened. He'd had the same thing, which was perversely reassuring. My attack prompted him to investigate and he found out it had a name, the K complex. You mean it's known about? Yeah. Enough of an objective fact to satisfy even you. It's a sudden explosion of lots of unused energy, used up in a flash, in conditions of sensory deprivation. He showed me the article. There it was, in black and white. And that was just a minor version. As it happened, about the time of Attila's arrival, the Harrier decided to while away some more hours on the Open University. He'd gone for a course called the Biological Basis of Behaviour. It sounded dodgy. Pavlov and manipulation, information only of use to the ruling class. Pavlov was just describing the facts. He said, you can't slag him off just because the facts don't happen to suit you. But the facts, I say, as you call them, came out of a setup. The dog didn't need the fucking bell to eat his dinner. If you want to know, he said, how things work, you've got to take them apart, experiment, introduce new factors and see what happens when this meets that. Anyway, I heard you were at the Roscoe Roadshow last night. It was an outrageous change of tack, but it put me on the defensive. It was true. I had gone. It had been the first show in years, not like the Scrubs, where there'd been a few, like Kathy Kirby's Big Night comeback. Roscoe, who called himself Emperor Roscoe, wasn't a patch on that. He spent a lot of time handing out stickers like a missionary. I felt defensive because I hadn't even enjoyed it. You go on about the liberation of women, Harrier said, but there you were just to see the go-go dancers. How's that for degradation? I wriggled. I squirmed, but the man was remorseless. In desperation, my motives being so misunderstood, I picked up one of his OU books and opened it, a page headed The Hypothalamus. An amazing part of the brain, very sophisticated. It regulated some basic bodily processes, the ones we experience as automatic, taking care of themselves. To work, it needed stimulus. I wasn't sure what stimulus exactly, but got a picture of the ecology of the body and that there was nothing mystical about the effects of sensory deprivation. So it was that when Attila, the debonair Scouse hardnut, told me about the regime on the moor, I felt a fresh burst of anger. He told me too that 3 screws had been well to the fore when it came to handing out stick when they'd regained control of the whole wing. Batterings, faces slammed down in the porridge, jam and marge, milk pissed in, all the while screws stood around the hot plate 30-handed, while the cons were let out one at a time. That was before the more leisurely process of smashing, ripping and killing budgies. I was banged up with my tea after he told me all this. The pictures bobbed about in my head and brought back all the frustration I'd felt at the time of the riot itself. I looked at my tea, the bacon that was never quite cooked, the brittle but dense fried bread and the orange-pink stuff called spaghetti, which, in my preoccupied rage, I'd put on my plate. I pictured my face plastered in that, congealed in my hair, stuffed in my ear holes. I pictured and remembered the last week's gangster movie we'd seen in the gym. How did he make it to be a capo, the P&T man had asked as the mafia boss got splattered over his pasta in a modest restaurant. Just a jumped-up torpedo, I said. The MAF were going through a lean time. I didn't know they had lean times. Neither did I, but it sounded good. Meanwhile, the Sharpie who'd pulled off this coup was himself starting to fatten and slacken now that he was off the streets. He wound up copping his chips over a fruit stall, blood and peach juice bursting over his white suit. Then this stage scene gave way to the immediacy of that Hull hot plate, the shouts and sweat of the screws, the swaying ranks of laughing, growling faces as the lone con went down. I'd made a resolution not to fall asleep during tea time lock-up on the grounds I felt so shitty, a dry mouth and giddy with a hovering headache when I woke up again. Only this time I did need to lie down. I turned on the radio. A news interviewer was steaming into a shop steward. Don't you realise the effect your action is having on the pound and therefore the cost of living for your members? The steward sounded punch-drunk. The interviewer weighed in again. How can you justify this action when your own union leader, Jack Jones, has described it as irresponsible? A spark of anger brought the steward back off the ropes. Jack Jones should remember he's paid by us, that he represents us, not the other way round. Then the news moved seamlessly on to the arrival in Plymouth of someone who'd sailed the Atlantic in a craft that was either smaller or more primitive than all the ones that had done it before. I woke to the click of the lock opening and stayed on the bed, groggy and vulnerable. 10 minutes later I was still there, afraid of the dizziness I might feel as I got up. Then the spaghetti and fried bread I had not eaten were waving up and down in front of my nose. Look at this, I heard, and shot up nauseous. It was Joe. What are you doing, you fucking madman? I shouted, the voice quavery. Look at this, man. This is reality. Do you realise that this solid orange chalk, which is now stuck to your plate, might have been glued in your stomach? And as for this, he said, banging the fried bread on the side of the plate to no effect, I can only say you had a narrow escape. What are you trying to do to me? I asked feebly. Me, Joe said with that dangerously vacant look. I was merely confirming how wise you were not to put this gluey shit in your stomach. Anyway, I've got you woken up, and if I was to open this window, we might even get rid of this horrible smell. The window did the trick. I sat up wide awake. Good. I've something serious to tell you. Who are you, the fucking doctor? The thought was unworthy. Instead, Joe said that some hole screws had been posted here in Long Lartin, and one at least had been an outstanding bastard. It's a provocation. One of the Hull boys might blow, and they've had enough trouble, weeks, months, years of remission down the drain. Well, we'll have to front something up, I said. So, well, a sit-down might be possible, nothing too heavy, and we might get some support. They can take a protest. No, not here they can't. They don't get many protests here, and it might shake up the governor. Last thing he wants is any bother between him and a smooth climb up the department ladder. OK, worth a go, but this place, it'll be a struggle to pull it off. I could do with some adrenaline half the time. I feel I'm coasting through this too easy. Is that right? You know who I'd like you to meet? Who? Jill Knight, Melford Stevenson, some hang 'em and flog 'em fanatic? Nope. One of those smug fuckers in remand nicks, the ones who write, if you can't do the time, don't do the crime on the cell wall. Those cunts all over Brixton, that was. Easy enough to sound remand when you don't know what the time is till you've done it. You've nearly done yours. Nearly's a long time, I said. By Sunday morning exercise, I felt there was a good chance of pulling off a sit-down. A few of us had been sounding out a whole range of cons on the Saturday. Dave had had some trouble with a guy going on about the fish. You remember it, the bloke said. We all agreed we wouldn't take the food, yet some of them took the fish. They ate the fucking fish. Dave said this had been around 7 years before in strange ways, and the guy always brought it up when there was any possibility of any action. I'd skirted around the subject with a couple of lifers. I had a date, they didn't. At worst, I'd lose some remission for them. It might just tip the scales to another X number of years. So I just mentioned what we had in mind, no more. In reality, it would depend on how many people took part. If it was over half the nick, the chances were there'd be no serious consequences for anyone, and we might actually win something. It would all be down to what happened on the night. It was going to be after the Sunday evening movie in the gym. Apart from exercise, this was the only time when the whole jail came together, and there were usually more cons at the film than on exercise. On this Sunday morning, the con football team were playing an outside team, and there was a good crowd on the touchlines. The governor was there too with his tweed cap and pipe, like he was a country gent on his estate. He was a rugby man, but on Sundays he stood there with the chief like a knowledgeable spectator of football, a man for whom the game belonged to some higher plane of existence. In some bit of his mind, the con became a player for the duration of the match. A couple of weeks before, he'd shown his class when a punch-up had broken out on the pitch. He looked through it as if it weren't really happening, ignoring the disparity between prison rules and the rules of the game. The con had been sent off. Any other situation, and it would have been 28 days remission. This Sunday, abuse homed in on the referee after he'd done some finger-waving at Attila, a robust centre-forward. Rap his knuckles, ref. Where you from, Wandsworth? Up the convicts. Put him on bread and water, you cunt. Behind the prison team's goal, I homed in on a London gangster I'd known for a few years. He was pissed off about being left out the team. Not a skillful player, but he was a fitness fanatic, which had to count for something. So I sympathised and put the sit-down idea to him. He was not enthusiastic, it was obvious, just as the visiting team stormed through on goal. See? No strength in the midfield. No fucking strength. Pathetic, I said. But it's a fucking liberty sending those animals here. I agree with you, John. Don't get me wrong. But there's so many no good cunts here, you'll only get a few backing you. Thing is, I say, if those screws stay here, it will go off one day. You know, like it or not, it will go off. You know what I mean? I jumped as the ball flew past my ear from a ferocious off-target shot. But I knew that had got your man thinking about it, that it might go off anyway. Well, are you going to speak then, he said. You know, tell them what it's all about, he said. Yep, I'll do that. We'd struck a deal. I'd do the talking, and his support would mean a good showing from A-Wing, from all the London gangsters, and a lot more on the strength of them turning up. The visiting team stormed forwards again, only this time the shot was a goal. Your man flung up his hand. See what I mean? The geezer fell over. Let him in, he said. Just hasn't got the strength, the cunt. By tea time, I felt confident everyone on our wing knew. A sarcastic con man who claimed to have been a member of the Communist Party said, "Going to do a Lenin, are you? Turn the masses with a speech?" "You won't find me in a mausoleum," I said, feeling good. The gym was big, not like the packed, smoky wreck of the Scrubs. I sat with David in the second row of chairs. We kept looking round. They looked full enough. Tony Curtis was playing a 30s gangster in a film shot that had been edited in all weird places. He's down to B movies now. It'll be TV films next, David said. I got absorbed in the story in fits and starts. He seemed well too temperamental to be a gang leader. Other faces were less than hearty in their greetings. Most films were like this, but some had touched the nerve. There'd been State of Siege, which I'd seen legless through a haze of George's purple beetroot hooch. It was gripping through the haze. I'd sweated with the Tupamaros on the bus. Or The Mean Machine set in a southern US jail, the Cons American football team overcoming death and disfigurement to beat the Screws team, while Eddie Albert, as the Nixon-like psycho football freak governor, went murderously apeshit. Most of all, there was One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Me and Jean-Pierre had leapt out of our chairs cheering when the Red Indian finally shows himself and finishes off lobotomised rebel Jack Nicholson. That night, the night after that film, only 2 out of the regular 40 went for their evening tot of tranquilizers. That's what I was told. This film tonight, though, was staple diet. Things were looking worse for Tony Curtis. He was looking isolated and was living on a misplaced, lazy confidence. Too much wishful thinking. What's more, the poor sod was in love. Personally, I think being in love's pretty fucking amazing, but when you're in his kind of business, bit of a luxury. Meanwhile, the cops were closing the net. It started to get to me, worried about our own show. It wasn't about remission or anything, but that it might be a shambles, that I might stumble over my words, that at a decisive moment it just wouldn't happen, that there'd be so few of us left with a choice only of creeping sheepishly out or getting well fucked over. Back on the screen, your man was captured in the deserted fairground, still in love. It's an electric chair job, and the director loves it. The sequence goes on and on, chaplains, governors, legalities, while your man is absolutely on his own in this dark, private and ordered thing. It's obviously the end of the film. Why don't they just finish it so we can get started? But no, this fucking director lingers over the chair itself, close-ups of the straps as your man's strapped in, the crinkle and crackle of the leather loud from the screen, and then zap goes the voltage. No one in the whole gym can be feeling good, not with Tony Curtis looking as white as a sheet ready for the laundry, his body flung about in the confines of the chair. The lights went up. We looked around. A few cons at the back got up and left, but not so many. The London gangster footballer said from behind, "This is fucked, John, this is no good." But there were half the cons of the jail still sat there. It was good. It wouldn't have been good if there'd been a long wait, but we were lucky that the Screws had a governor on the scene in quick time. Go on then, John, I heard from behind. As per usual, there was plenty of unnecessary, unwanted adrenaline pumping around to go with the dry mouth. I said something to the effect that there were some whole Screws here who were liable to face charges and that they were a provocation. I did not sound eloquent. Worse, I repeated myself, could hear myself doing it. Still, when I sat down, there were cries of, "That's right, Governor!" Then the next whole con took up the point. We wanted them out at least until whatever whole Screws were going to go on trial went on trial. The AG came right out and said, "We couldn't get Screws on our say-so. Who did they think we were?" But that on the other hand, he would pass on our complaints. "We've made our point," I heard from behind. That was it. The shuffling of chairs and feet, it was over, and felt like a ludicrous anti-climax. It was level-headed Dave who said it was fine. What had I expected? Mass fucking insurrection? He was right. It had been just solid enough. 2 days later, the Screws we'd named were gone. Thank you.